Hey everybody, Argent here. If you've watched my channel for any amount of time, you'll notice that I'm a huge movie fan, and I figure it's the end of the year, so let's do a countdown of my favorite 5 movies from this year. Now, this is not quite the same as what I would objectively say is the best movies. Some movies on this list are more flawed than others. It's a combination of what I think is a good movie slash my personal preference. Like some movies that I like Speed Racer, I really like, but I realize it's not. It has a lot of problems as a movie. And then there's other movies that I admit are really good movies, or are considered really good movies, like The Godfather, that I'm just not a big fan of. I can see why that's a really good movie. I just don't personally think it's that good. The Godfather 1 wasn't bad. The Godfather Part 2 I can't watch. I just find it super boring. But yeah, so if you see my channel at all, you'll notice my bias tends to be towards horror movies or smarter action movies. I'm not sure exactly why that's the case. I think it's because those tend to be the least left-wing genres of film. Action movies tend to kind of be right-wing to a certain extent by their nature, and horror movies also tend to be kind of right-wing. But if people like this countdown, I'll do more countdowns in future. If you want, I can go back like the last 10 years or so and do my top 5 best and top 5 worst movies from each year. So if you want that, just post a comment at the bottom. So just very briefly talking about 2016, it was not a good year for film. Sometimes there are good years. I think it was 2015 was a good year, and then there are bad years like this year. Movies all tend to start and end development at the same time. So some years you'll have like a ton of big name releases coming out. Like I think one year Pirates 3 came out and like a whole bunch of other stuff came out that year. But this year not a lot really came out. We had a couple big movies. But if we look at like the last half of the year, there wasn't really a lot that was released. So if a lot of my reviews have been pretty negative this year, that's partially just because it's not been a good year. It's also partially I just go see movies because I just like to watch movies. So I'll go see something if it's on. I'll just say, oh, this looks watchable, so I'll go watch it. Sometimes I'll go watch movies I know will be bad because I enjoy bad movies like Assassin's Creed. But without further ado, let's start the countdown. We begin at number 5 with Lights Out. Now, as I've said, I have a bias towards horror movies, particularly smarter horror movies and smarter action movies. So Lights Out is one of the best horror movies I've seen in years, to be perfectly honest. It had an interesting premise. If you haven't seen the movie, maybe skip ahead a minute. The premise was basically that there was a woman born who is like a demon child, and they attempted to cure her by exposing her to ultraviolet light, and it made her kind of get stuck between this world and the next, and she could only appear in the dark. And she was trying to possess her childhood friend who was also from the same asylum. But it features the lovely Teresa Palmer and a variety of other kind of good characters. And it's just a lot better done than a lot of horror movies. It's more legitimately scary. The mechanic of the ghost, the demon, like the monster only being visible when it's dark, lends to a lot of really interesting cinematography. Like where there's like the demon and then it jumps at them and then they flick the lights on and it disappears. There's a really creepy scene when they're in the basement. The characters are just a lot more interesting. Like Teresa Palmer's character is kind of a realistic portrayal of someone who grew up in such a messed up home would be. So she's kind of a bit of a thought, but she's also very sympathetic. Her relationship with her younger brother is very sympathetic. And I think the thing I like the most about the movie is not everybody dies at the end, and there's no sequel baiting. They didn't feel it was necessary to kill off the entire cast. I like horror movies where basically the process is kind of like purgatory, and they manage to redeem themselves by the end of the movie and come out better for it. So Lights Out is the 5th best movie of this year, and I highly recommend watching it. Now, this and number 3 are going to be controversial because virtually everyone who watches this will probably think this is a better movie than number 3. And in most regards, it is a better movie. Number 3 in this list is personal preference. Avengers Civil War kind of had to be on this list, if for no other reason, just because of how much money was behind this movie. And I think this one is kind of the movie that Avengers 1 and Avengers 2 should have been. I don't think I've actually done a review of it. It was funny because back when I had a blog, I would get like 5 views per post. And I did one of the very few negative reviews of the first Avengers movie. And I just talked about how much I thought it sucked. And I got like a ton of reviews very quickly on it. So, yeah, this I think was better than both the Avengers movies. I think because it was one of the first Marvel movies to actually kind of have a deeper themes in it of kind of order versus freedom. I think kind of more the message for me I got out of this movie was inequality versus natural inequality. The perspective of kind of Captain America and his followers is that there is a natural elite. There is kind of a natural noble caste and warrior caste in society who have a duty to rule and to fight for what's right. And that's more important, the moral judgments of these exceptional people, than kind of rulership by the plebs, than democratic accountability to the masses. Whereas Iron Man's perspective is that kind of all-powerful individuals threaten the whole, and that for the greater good they need to be restrained. And I think there's positive and negatives to both positions. Because to be fair to Iron Man, in this universe there are people like Jean Grey who can blow the planet in two. So like we would want Jean Grey to be controlled or even given that thing that destroys her mutant powers because she's dangerous. I'm not sure if Thor's quite strong enough to blow up the world, but Tony Stark's attempt to save the world created Ultron, who almost destroyed all of humanity. So I think it makes a lot of sense, his perspective, but at the same time, he places the Avengers under the control of democratically elected politicians who have no foresight and are only concerned with being elected in the next 4 years and are basically moral nihilists. So I think in this movie there was a great deal of sympathy towards both sides. And aside from that, it was just an excellent action movie. It was a lot of fun. They did a really good job on the action scenes. In contrast to a lot of movies, they held the camera still. The action scenes were always crisp and clear. And I don't know, it had a bit more grit to it. It's kind of hard to describe exactly, in short term, exactly why I really like this. But I think compared to the other Marvel movies, it had much better action scenes, much more interesting action scenes, and they really took advantage of the strengths and weaknesses of each different hero when they went up against each other. I think the airport action scene where the 6 pro-Registration Act and 6 anti-Registration Act heroes are fighting each other is probably one of the great movie action scenes of all time. Plus, I think they handled Bucky a lot better. The second and third Captain America movie are both really solid, and they stand out along with the first Thor as being what I think the best Marvel Universe movies. So, that being said, let's move on to number 3. Now, this will probably be by far the most controversial entry on this list. Most people I've talked to hate this movie and think it's awful. And I think most people would say that this movie is substantially worse than Civil War. So why do I like this movie so much? I guess it's because the concept and kind of the underlying moral and I guess you could almost say metaphysical issues of the film I really enjoy. And it's largely a subjective thing why I really like this movie. First off, with the Superman character, I think they explore a side of Superman that doesn't get enough attention, the responsibility and difficulties of being a god. Because basically Superman is alone at the top. He's the only being on Earth who's as strong as him. Sure, there's other superheroes like Wonder Woman, But Superman can hear anything on Earth. He can be anywhere on Earth. He can move so fast that he basically teleports. And the question is Superman allowed to have his own life? Does he have to, every time something happens on the Earth, is it his job to go and intervene? What is his role as basically the god of humanity? Is it his job to save absolutely everyone? Is it his job to let people die? Is he supposed to stop wars? Is he supposed to let wars go? And I think they could have gone into a bit more detail, but I think it's kind of an interesting exploration of his role as kind of being a messianic figure and kind of having to be the god of humanity without having the omniscience and the ability to see all future outcomes that the real God has. So I thought that was really interesting. And the title of my review was "The Burdens of Deity Great. It Is Not Easy Being God." And that's from Advent Rising. And the universe of Advent Rising is humans are gods. And the last couple surviving humans are taught to unlock their secret potential. And it's not very well dealt with because the game was an unfinished mess. But I always thought that was kind of an interesting concept. An average person, because Superman was raised as basically an average Midwesterner in a red state, having to come to terms with suddenly being all-powerful and having no one else at the top to give him guidance. Batman also is really interesting because Batman in the movie is getting old. He's realized that his decades-long crusade against crime has all but failed, and as soon as he dies, there will be no legacy. Gotham will just go back to the way it was before. And to a certain extent, he's looking for a way out. He's looking for an honorable death that'll give meaning to his decades of fighting. And he's come to the conclusion that as he's getting old and the Earth and entirely human heroes like him are being replaced by metahumans, that his last kind of bow, his last duty to humanity is to preserve the Earth for humans. And to that end, he wants to take down Superman. And throughout the movie, you can see he's pretty much resigned to his own death. He just wants to bring down Superman and keep the world for humanity. So I guess you can kind of see Superman once again as representing free will and natural development. Sorry, Batman is representing free will and natural development. And Superman kind of representing enforced order. And once again, as with Civil War, there is a lot of merits to both of them. And kind of the clash between the two is interesting. Well, this is a deeply flawed movie that drags in a lot of parts, has some lame plot twist, and the action scenes aren't always the best. I really do love the fight scene between Superman and Batman, as Batman does kind of embody the best of humanity, and Superman is basically a god. And it shows kind of the struggle between man against something greater than himself. So I really did enjoy this movie. The ending was also pretty good, with Superman kind of completing his role as humanity's messiah by sacrificing himself to save the world. There's lots of other criticisms people have of the movie, but I just really enjoyed it for what it is, and I enjoyed it for kind of some of the moral questions it raised. So that being said, it is my third favorite movie of this year. Number 2 is Hacksaw Ridge. Hacksaw Ridge is a movie I had moderate expectations for. I wasn't really sure what to expect going into it. Mel Gibson always does a good job on movies he directs and movies he acts in. It's good to see him back, and this is a very Mel story about war, faith, courage. What Mel really grasps, and I think Mark Stein said this about Braveheart and about most Mel films, it's about something primal. It's about manly pride. It's about freedom. It's about survival. It's about kind of the core issues of human nature. It kind of strips away a lot of the bullshit and just kind of focuses on something primal. And I think Hacksaw Ridge does a very good job of that. It's about a man's struggle to stay true to who he is and what he believes in. There's a lot of interesting contrast in the movie with his father and how screwed up he is from the previous war, and how he's seen that violence transformed his father from a brave and honorable man to a disaster who beats his mother. And he doesn't want to go down that path. At the same time, though, he's torn between wanting to help his country and protect his comrades. And ultimately, when we get to the actual war, it's probably the most realistic war movie I've ever seen, outside of maybe Saving Private Ryan and Enemy at the Gates. I'll have to do a review of Enemy at the Gates at some point. But the war scenes are absolutely amazing. As someone who's kind of an aficionado of World War II weapons and World War II action tactics, battle tactics and stuff like that, I found it super accurate. All the guns were very much similar to how they were historically, and their various uses. The use of suppressive fire, just the squad infantry tactics, all that stuff was spot on. Getting to see a battleship just devastate the enemy position was good. I think it was another movie that I liked that it didn't shill for the Japanese. It didn't portray them as hapless victims, but as a dangerous and wily foe that was willing to do horrific things in order to win. People like to say, oh, the Japanese, oh, they were beat up by the Americans, when the Japanese were just as brutal, if not probably more brutal than the Germans and Russians were in World War II. So overall, it's an excellent movie with outstanding performances from everybody involved, great action scenes, and the best part of all is it's a true story. It's absolutely amazing. I definitely recommend watching it, but the number one movie just edges it out by a little bit. My number one movie is 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi. Now, a lot of people may think this is weird, but I'll explain. I have to say, Michael Bay is a really good director when someone has him on a leash. I find with Michael Bay, if you have him on a leash, if you get him to focus, if someone just tells him, no, Michael, you can't do stupid shit. You can't have the two black Transformers. You can't have all this stupid side shit. You just have to focus on telling the story and doing action scenes, because that's what you're good at. And this movie felt like someone put Michael Bay in a straitjacket, and he kind of took the best elements of Pearl Harbor, Bad Boys, The Rock, and his just cheesy, over-the-top patriotism, and he just mixed it together into a truly amazing movie. 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi deals with a group of Special Forces and Navy SEALs who were trapped in Benghazi during Hillary Clinton's What Difference Does It Make? And they're forced to defend the ambassador, whatever his name was. I don't remember, and it doesn't really matter. And after he dies, they're forced to defend a compound against wave upon wave of Islamist troops who go after them. I think it really demonstrates very well what a war zone is like. It's a very realistic movie. Throughout the film, they're not sure who they can trust. The local security keeps running away. They keep going through checkpoints and almost dying. There's parts in the movie where everybody's just shooting at another. And there's a point in the movie where one of the Muslim guys just shrugs and he's like, what the fuck's going on? But throughout it all, I think it really shows, and I always like this, how superior a trained army is against a bunch of rabble. These guys are the best of the best. They're Navy SEALs. They know squad tactics. They know how to shoot properly. They can cover each other. People don't really understand how guns work. If you've ever shot like a pistol, for instance, it's extremely difficult to hit anything with a pistol at anything other than point blank range. Rifles are much, much easier to use because you just kind of hold them up and look down the sights. Pistols are difficult. That's part of the reason why you have so many rounds in them, because you just have to fire blindly a lot of the time. And it's difficult even if you have a machine gun to hit anything. That's part of the reason why they use AKs, just because they can spray and pray. A lot of these people aren't particularly well trained, but the American soldiers in this movie are the best of the best. And you can see them just cut down waves upon waves of opponents because they have trigger disciplines. They don't just spray and pray. They make every shot count, and they just devastate inferior forces. I think it was also interesting just how much of an advantage their equipment gave them. There's a really cool scene when they're defending the compound and they shoot out all the lights and then they put night vision on. So because they have night vision and none of the enemies do, like the 4 or 5 of them are able to hold off like 100 guys because the other guys can't see them, but they can see them. And all they have is their M4s and I think one light machine gun and a walled compound. And they're able to just hold off like hundreds of guys and just rack up kill after kill after kill. It's one of the best, I guess, kind of in my view at least, most realistic, although it's dramatic, kind of portrayals of what modern military combat is like. Urban warfare, the general fog of war in these kind of zones, and in general just kind of the what we put our boys into when we send them to these distant conflicts with no real direction, with no real kind of instructions, and they get screwed by the people higher up. Like in this incident, it's very notable because Hillary wouldn't send them support because it would make the Obama administration look bad. And a bunch of these guys, including the ambassador, got killed because of the general incompetence and unwillingness of the American government. And this isn't a political film. It's a bit like Passive Glory. Passive Glory was not exactly an anti-war film. It wasn't really a political film. It was more or less trying to be pathos for the common soldier and to detail kind of the frustration of dealing with out-of-touch officers. John McCain's favorite movie is Passive Glory because it reminds him a lot of the time he served in Vietnam. And overall, I just think it captures the state of modern war really well. And you see these guys, and it's just amazing. They're in the face of probably certain death, facing off hundreds of enemies, no one that they can trust, and they just stay calm, and they just keep firing, and they keep just kicking ass. And they're just completely indifferent to their coming deaths, because they have to defend their people, they have to defend the civilians. And it's just such a tribute to the honor and courtesy of our armed forces. Obviously, I'm Canadian, but all the same, big fan of the U.S. Army. So I absolutely loved this movie. I thought it was the best movie of 2016, and at some point I'll do my top 5 worst movies of the year. So I'll talk to you guys later. More videos to come.